All right. Welcome back. I'm going to check our YouTube's. I don't have the link on here. I trust you all on the live stream can hear me talking. If not, text me if you have my number. But welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining again. I'm pleased to see that I didn't scare everyone away last week. Dave has told me that in light of kind of current things that we would be well advised to go well over our allotted time today. So we are planning on going past 9 o'clock. Seeing as how there's nothing that anybody in Cleveland would want to watch tonight. So
You just have to watch the game with me to do cardiac care.
So buckle up. We are going to go in for a wild ride tonight. And for, I think, the one of you who's out there who doesn't live in Cleveland, hi, Dad. The Browns are playing the Steelers. First game of the playoffs, which the Browns have not been in, 18 years? Yeah. And so this is a pretty big deal in Cleveland. Go Browns.
Half the team's out with COVID, the head coach.
All right, so let's dive in. And first, before we get going, any questions kind of about last week or comments or things you kind of wanted to extrapolate upon, or we hit everything pretty decently? Our goal is to see, what God has to say about money in this course, and then practically do it. Last week, just kind of by way of reminder, we laid a foundation about how to view our finances in the overall bigger picture of God's view and His vision for our world, right? And practically creating a foundational framework, or the verbiage that we use, the roadmap, that we can order and hang on, hang other financial topics upon, right? So the goal is to kind of get the big picture view of our money and then kind of the big picture practical understanding, right? That was lesson 1. Lesson 2, we looked at the most important aspects of our finance. That is to view the money that God has entrusted to us in the generosity narrative that emanates from a biblical worldview, so lesson 1, right? And how the generosity propels us to be generous as well, right? And then we looked at ways that we could give and be generous and why we should give. And so hopefully that kind of reminds ourselves of of what came before, or came last week. And I was thinking about it on the way in. I just wanted to take a little bit of an aside. I don't think I mentioned this last week, and if I did, you can hit me or something. I am super thankful for everybody here at Riverview. And I'm just going to step out of the teaching hat and put my finance team leader hat on. And this is not approved by Dave, and so he may be searching for a new finance team leader after tonight. But when COVID hit, right, everything shut down, people were out of work, and we were really expecting to take a huge financial hit here at Riverview. And we had budgeted kind of in faith a little bit in the last budget. We had some big goals, and we were really hoping that, that the Lord would provide. And then COVID happened, we were trying to figure out what to do. And we actually applied for, but never got the PPP loan, right, that the government was making available to small businesses and not-for-profits. And the only reason I didn't get it is because too many people wanted it in front of us. But as I looked through the finances for our church, our giving never really took a big dip, right? I mean, we could look maybe month to month and find just minor 1 or 2% differences. But throughout the spring, the summer, and then as of a couple months ago when I did some tallies, I got to get caught up in the last quarter, our finances have been pretty much rock solid. And so I've just been as I reflect on that, I've been super thankful for the people at Riverview who, despite going through a really, really rough year, have just been super generous. So thank you. It doesn't profit me a lick, but I'm just the one that gets to see it. And so thank you for the generosity that you have to propel the ministry forward and to support, Dave and Seth and Carrie, who are actually on staff and benefiting from our generosity. So that's an excursus aside on generosity. Today we're going to talk about our treasure, in our budget and how living, or as well as loving money, and how the implications it has on the way we view, our money and basically debt, and then how we deal with it, right? So that's going to be the big picture of today: treasure and budget, love of money, and debt, right? And so as we get started, let's just thank the Lord for the release of this poor lisping and stammering tongue, because it stammers a ton, and hopefully this material will be clear to you guys. So, Lord, thank you for today and for the opportunity just to worship you this morning, and to reconvene tonight and just dig into your word and into practical finance and learn how that can be a benefit to us, but also to the world that you've put us in. I pray you'd give us open hearts, give me clear words, and that you would be glorified in all that's done and said tonight. In your name we pray, amen. All right, the key passage for this first lesson is going to be found in Matthew 6, 19 and 21, or through 21. Do not lay up for yourselves treasure on earth, where moth or rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth or rust destroys, or where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your hearts will be also. Matthew 6, 19 through 21. So I don't have a copy of it. I didn't bring it with me, but a couple years ago I read a really fascinating book. It was called Pirate Hunters by Robert Kurson, right? If you're looking for just a thriller, like a nonfiction thriller, read it. It's cool. He's actually got a couple other books that are really cool too. But in this book, he tells a story of a guy named John Chatterton and John Matera. These are contemporaries of us right now. And they are modern day treasure hunters, right? And they had their quest to find the Golden Fleece, right? The Golden Fleece is the lost ship of the infamous 17th century pirate, John Bannister, right? Good old, arr, matey. The story is fascinating as it chronicles their quest for this treasure and how they sought to really understand Bannister and really get into his mind about, and really how they risk everything in their lives to make this discovery. Read the book, right? But this story resonates with us because the idea of treasure is hardwired into our hearts, right? We don't have to think too hard about it to realize that this is true, right? So the big picture of tonight's first lesson is our heart seeks treasure. How we spend our money then reveals what our heart ultimately values. And again, just to kind of remind you, a lot of the first material, the theological material, comes from this book, right? We gave out a couple copies last week. I don't have more copies to give out this week, but it's like $20 on Amazon. It's probably one of the best $20 you'll spend. So go get it. It's Redeeming Money by Paul David Tripp. So like Dave said this morning, I'm referencing it, so it's no longer plagiarism. Anyway, our heart seeks treasure. How we spend our money reveals what our heart ultimately values. So as we think about our budget today, let's talk about what we treasure and what that says about us, right? And we're going to look at this in a number of contexts, right? Number one, what we treasure reveals what our heart values, okay? There is something that is built into human nature to seek and to find value in things and to pursue things of value, right? We want to find a good deal. I mean, think about it. You're searching your phone to find a good deal. You're looking for a car, you want to find the best deal. The way to fleece that dealer out of his commission so that you can get the deal, right? The value. In our everyday lives, we assign value to things, right? This is the basis for the study of economics, right? Prices change based on the supply of a product or the demand for that product. And based on the supply-demand, we determine that something is of great value or just a piece of junk. It's worthless. As a result, we seek things that we value, right? We don't seek the junk. We find something of value, and we then seek that. We become convinced that if we have that thing, then life will have an enhanced meaning, and reverse, when we do without that thing, life has somehow less meaning. Okay? When we get something, I told you that example of the drone, right? I bought this drone last year, and up until when I bought it, I'm like, wow, life is going to be so in like 4K Technicolor, once I get this thing, and I got the thing, and it's like, life is still kind of the same, kind of shades of pastel. Or not pastel, but like shades of gray, with a little color mixed in, So we try to find meaning in the things that we value. We tell ourselves that if we were able to possess and experience what we have come to treasure, then we'll be satisfied and happy and finally experience that inner rest that every human being desires. Okay. Think about modern day marketing. We're going to go home and watch TV tonight and watch the Browns spank the Steelers, interspersed with commercials, right? These ads and commercials try to get us to see something or create value in our hearts for something we didn't even know we valued 30 seconds prior. I didn't know that I liked Colgate toothpaste that much. I don't, but I didn't know that toothpaste was so important to me until I saw it on TV and some person going, brushing their teeth. All of a sudden, once we see this, our life is less full and less meaningful until we fill it with that thing, right? So if we look back at our decisions and what we pursue and what we purchase and what we buy, we can start to see more clearly what it is that we're living for and what is our functional treasure. So if we take that principle forward, we can look at it almost in reverse and say, what did I buy last month and how does that reflect then my values? And is that value concordant with what I need it to be, right? So if we're honest with ourselves, we may find that our functional treasure isn't quite the same thing as what we declare to be our treasure, right? I don't think any of us would say, I don't treasure Christ. But do our purchases on a day-to-day basis, week to week, month to month, reflect the same value that we declare on Sunday morning, right? So number 2, what we treasure affects our decisions, right? And this is an easy leap from what we just said, but it follows from this previous point. When we assign value to something, then that thing affects the decisions that we make. I think I mentioned it last week. One of the things I value is fitness and health. A couple of years ago, well, more than a couple of years ago now, but several years back, someone who was just a few years older than I had an MI, and I happened to be his physician. Right? As a friend of mine, I took care of him, said, buddy, you're having a heart attack, and whisked him up to the cath lab, and to this day, he's like, Dr. Tabbitt saved my life. I'm like, no, I just called the person who did, but it really struck me at, like, I need to kind of get my physical life in order, right? And so since then, I value fitness and health. I value that idea of being strong and being capable of handling anything that life throws at me. So if someone kind of walks down the road, I want to look like an intimidating guy so they don't come beat me up, right? If I have to go help you move, I want to be able to lift your heavy furniture so you don't think I'm a wuss, right? So I value these things, right? I find ways to be fit, to be strong. I get up early. I also value sleep, but apparently I value being strong more. And so when the alarm goes off at 5:30 and I hit the snooze knowing that I have till 5:45 to get out of bed to be in the basement by 6, that reflects what I value, right? I set aside time, I lose sleep, I actually pay money to buy heavy things to lift and make a lot of noise and sweat in my basement, right? Because I value this stuff, right? Matthew 13:44 says, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then, with the joy, or with his joy, or then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. He values that treasure so much that nothing else that he has is of value to him anymore, right? It affects the decisions that he makes. He sold it all to get that hidden treasure in the field. And if we're honest with ourselves, our lives follow a trail of choices, decisions, and actions that have been magnetized by what we hold dear. And it isn't always bad, right? That concept isn't necessarily a negative concept in and of itself, right? The key is that we place the right value on the right things so that comparatively we value these things more than the things that we ought not to value. Does that make sense? Number 3, what we treasure affects what we see. Our heart is always fixed and focused on some hope, some dream, and something we value, right? What our heart seeks, or what your heart seeks, what our hearts seek, our physical eyes will look for and notice. I'm sure you've noticed this phenomenon, maybe perhaps without even noticing it. When you value or prioritize something, you start seeing it everywhere, right? For example, in addition to fitness and health, I value this persona of self-reliance and personal responsibility. Right? I think I've read books on this. This is the way I try to organize my life, that I need to not necessarily be dependent upon everybody. I need to be dependent on the Lord and other things, but I don't want to necessarily have to need somebody to brush my teeth for me in the morning. And I value the concept of I own this, and if there's a mistake that was made, I own the mistake and I move forward, and not just be like, well, I did that, but they did that. So these concepts of self-reliance and personal responsibility, I value it. So when I so when I see examples of that not happening, i.e., many of the patients at my job, who are there because of poor decisions they frankly made, and the responsibility they haven't taken, that kind of comes up, and I notice it, right? I notice, well, you aren't taking responsibility for yourself, and you're expecting me to take responsibility for you now, and I will because that's my job, but it's kind of off-putting a little bit, Does that make sense? If we want to state this more materially, okay, I have always loved diesel Chevy trucks. For those of you who've heard me teach before, this is not a new concept. For those of you who haven't heard me teach before, surprise! I actually now drive one, right? When you hear that monstrous roar, it's either Mike or myself leaving the parking lot, right? But what do you think I notice when I'm driving around, right? I notice diesel Chevy trucks, right? Who cares about the Ford? Ford means found on road dead. Sorry for any Ford fans. Chevy means it'll be driven in heaven. But I notice the subtleties of that's a gas truck. Have you noticed that the diesel trucks have the larger tailpipe than the gas have the smaller tailpipe? And in 2017, when I got my truck, Chevy put the little hood scoop on it, right? So if you see the hood scoop, that's a dead giveaway. But I notice these things, right? Because this is something that I value. I value my truck. I mean, maybe I shouldn't value it as much, right? But the same concept is true in all the spheres of our lives, right? Our physical vision is not neutral. It is guided by the eyes of our heart, right? So what we treasure shapes the way we see the world around us. So the question we should ask ourselves is, what physical things get your focus or get your attention, right? Because they connect the treasure that has already commanded the focus of our heart. These things that our eyes notice are the things that your heart has already named as important and valuable. So the treasure of your heart always shapes what you can see or what you do see. Fourthly, our treasure affects what we worship, right? To worship something is to treat something or someone with honor, reverence, and adoration. That's the Matt Tabbitt adaptation of whatever's in the dictionary, right? It is to prize something highly and to allow that treasuring to affect our thoughts and motivations and actions. That's what we gathered this morning to do, to recognize and to proclaim the value of Christ and to honor and show reverence and adoration to him for what he's done for us, right? Our hearts are naturally inclined and organized by the functional worship of what we most value. We're natural worshipers, right? What we do on Sunday morning, though sometimes awkward depending on what happened throughout the week and our spiritual frame of mind, is actually a very natural expression of our human nature, right? We worship something, right? Whether it be God or the Browns. Picking up on tonight. We live in a world filled with interesting and beautiful things that can be acquired through the possession of money, right? And money is the root of everything in this world, right? So the Bible never says it's evil to find pleasure in created things or even to own them. And the Bible never teaches the theology of austerity, that your degree of spirituality is somehow correlated to your degree of poverty, right? But the Bible does teach that when functional, life-shaping love for money and what it allows you to acquire and enjoy squeezes out your heart for the functional, life-shaping love of God, or love for God, that was designed to be the organizing principle of our life, then we're in deep spiritual problems with what we worship. Or in other words, we have a problem with idolatry, right? Money is one of God's creations, and we don't solve problems with idolatry by cursing the idol. That doesn't make any sense. The prophets, or the people of Israel don't solve their problem of worshiping the Baals by cursing the fact that Baal exists, right? They fix it by worshiping the one and true God. So we need to be clear-eyed about the corrupting influence that sin perverts the way we see and view money. Whether we desire or not, and whether we like it or not, this is the reflection of the fact that we functionally worship money and oftentimes not God. Right? We may say on Sunday morning that we worship the one true God, and that should be the desire of our heart. But on a practical, day-by-day, decision-by-decision basis, that may not be the functional object of our worship every single moment of every single day. So the question to answer in your heart is this: is the God that you worship and serve on Sunday the same God that you worship and serve on Monday through Saturday? And I was a little bit convicted about this on my way in, thinking, man, I'm teaching about worship, I'm teaching about God, and I just spent the last week just doing normal life. There's a few prayers thrown in here and there, and we were reading the Bible, and I was preparing this, and so God wasn't completely devoid of my thoughts, or not completely out of my thoughts. But there's something different by the bookends of Sundays than there is Monday through Saturday, right? So do you spend money on credit cards that you can't pay, accumulating things that attempt to make you happy? Do you stay up night worrying about how you will pay your cards? Do both parents work requiring someone else to care for your children in an effort to achieve an upper middle class lifestyle? Do you work more than what is contractually required of you in order to create more wealth and more power? Or do you find security in a large bank account? And if one or more of those questions gets in your kitchen, it's probably reflective of what's in our hearts. And I know at least one or two of those probably would be applicable to me, right? A couple more. When you look at purchasing a house or car, do you think about the status that it will bring you? And does your budget reflect God's priorities for your life or your desire for personal pleasure and satisfaction? So what we treasure is a reflection of who is our master, right? This is the final one. No one can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one or serve the other, or hate the one or love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money, Matthew 6:24. We were created to live under mastery. We like to think that we are the masters of our own destiny, right? And that somehow we can be the masters of our environment. But the reality is that we're not wired that way, right? At the risk of becoming a little bit too political, I cherish our freedom and our liberty that we have here in America, right? But the American idea of libertarian autonomy, separate from the Libertarian Party, but that libertarian autonomy of I can do what I want to do, is not a biblical concept. Now, it's beneficial in America, when we talk about how to interact with one another, but it's not biblical to say I can do whatever I want. I mean, they wrote the book of Judges about that, right? We can see how that turned out. Even the penultimate concept in my line of work in medical ethics of individual autonomy fails this biblical litmus test, right? We surrender our hearts to some kind of master, and at the most fundamental level, something controls us, either God or our sin nature. And what masters your heart shapes your thoughts, desires, choices, words, actions, and emotions, and even how we spend our money, right? What Christ is revealing in this passage is that there's great spiritual war being fought within your heart. So which master will you serve, right? This has that overtones of Joshua, choose this day whom you will serve, right? Christ or money. Between Christ and money, one of these will become your master, okay? Both will command allegiance, and both offer promises, right? Both tell you that, both will offer you kind of this sense of life and the sense of peace and satisfaction. But only one can actually deliver that, right? Either you're investing your life in the pursuit of money and will get you, or you're investing your life in the pursuit of God and what he says is of value. And this is kind of depressing, right? What's worse is we will never worship Christ on the admission and the mission of don't worship and serve other things, right? That's a really lousy way of getting you to stop doing something. Rather, to arm yourself against the temptations of treasuring money more highly than we ought, it would be helpful to look at what it means to seek the kingdom of God and to make Christ the king, right? So before we move on to budget, we're going to talk a little bit about I normally am more tied to this thing, and apparently I didn't make a slide for that. So we're just going to go back to here. We're going to talk about God's kingdom for a few minutes, right? Scripture talks a lot about the kingdom of God. In this realm, both now and someday, where God is king and everything operates in accordance with his values. And in his kingdom, the treasure is Christ himself. His gift for forgiving and rescuing, it's his gift for giving, rescuing, transforming, and delivering grace. There's nothing more valuable than the gift of his Son, of God's Son. And when we value this treasure properly, it will become the organizing value of our lives. It will determine how much time and energy and money are spent, right? And this, I'm going to, just for the sake of not even plagiarizing, I'm just going to read this word for word out of here. Page 99. Emmanuel has invaded my life by his grace. He has done for me what I could not do for myself. His grace has provided the rescue that the law could not provide. He has lavished on me love that I could never, in my most delusional moments, think I deserve. He does not turn his back on me, even in my most arrogant and rebellious moments. He never mocks my weakness or throws my sin back in my face. He is faithful when I don't have the sense to be. He fights on my behalf, even in the moments when I am too lazy to fight. And he will not quit doing all these things in and for me until his work of grace is complete. The gift of this treasure is the stunning reality of my existence. So understanding and internalizing our position in the kingdom of God that we learned about last week, right, then has profound implications for our budget. Right? A budget alone doesn't give you the power to worship the right king. Right? A budget can expose what king you do worship. And the good news is that there is grace sufficient for our weakness. And when we use a budget to narrow the gap between our and we can use this budget to narrow the gap between our stated and functional treasures, right? And if we humbly repent and seek the strength that only God can provide, he will gladly lavish his grace on you. So, let's figure out where we are in the slideshow. Let's build a budget. Sound like a plan? So budget is very important, right? It is an important part of your financial life and a plan, or for your life and plan, and for a number of reasons, right? The budget helps us see what our heart desires, right? It reveals the desires of our heart. It helps us figure out that we have a gap between our functional and our stated treasure. But it is also a tool that we can use to help orient our heart to what we ought to treasure, and provides the freedom to spend according to your goals and your values without worrying about the spending. This is one of the things that I think is so misunderstood. People often view a budget as a diet. I can't eat that because I'm on a diet. I can't spend money because I'm on a budget. Your budget is basically a pre-planned spending plan, right? I'm going to get paid this week, and I'm going to go spend it. But I'm going to spend it on this, 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 and this, right? It's a plan that can help you make progress along your financial roadmap instead of just kind of always catching your tail. And finally, it serves as the foundation that allows you to accomplish all of your financial goals, right? And we're going to look at this over the course of the coming weeks. Like, as we set out our goals, how do we accomplish these? And for your taxes and for your savings and your insurance and your retirement and your investments and even estate planning, if I can finish reading the book that I'm reading right now. So when you get control of your spending, you can determine how your limited and scarce resources will get allocated, right? So when you create a budget, it's your job to identify, it is your job to identify every dollar, right, that you earn, and then give every dollar a job, right? Remember, there's no perfect way to create a budget, right? There's no called balls and strikes as long as it balances, right? So make a budget and let's balance it, right? Your budget, while fueled by common biblical principles, will be unique to you, an expression of your individual situation. Your budget will not look anything like mine, and mine won't look anything like yours, right? As long as at the end of the year your income exceeds your expenses, There'll be no called balls and strikes, right? Or fumbles, to follow tonight's theme. Also remember, there are always more ways of spending your money than you have money. So then budgeting becomes an exercise of determining your priorities, right? So before we get into actually doing it, let's just knock out a couple tips, things that I've found helpful over the course of the years that I've done budgeting, right? The first one, and probably the most important one, I mean, I guess we could do it prayerfully. That's probably the most important. But do it with your partner, right? Do it with your spouse, okay? If the Lord has blessed you in that capacity, right? This is something, if you're married, should not be done on your own, right? Because it impacts everything about your relationship, right? Finances can be one of the most stressful aspects of a marriage, or finances can bring something that brings you together. Maybe I'm just the weirdo in the room. Personally, finances have not been the major stressor in my wife and I's relationship. I should probably be thankful because I know that's probably not the case for many people. Now, we have plenty of other stressors, which we will not get into tonight. But this is one aspect where I'm just thankful at the Lord's provision of providing someone who's like-minded. And so it's not been an issue for us. But maybe it is. Maybe it's probably more common than not that one's a spender and one's not. And I do know that I'm the spender and Sarah's not. Our finances, the key though is we need to find a way to do it. And again, this doesn't have to be the same way for everybody. It doesn't have to be you all sit down on a Thursday night and just hammer it out until you're bleary-eyed Friday morning. Maybe someone creates the budget. Maybe someone then edits the budget. For us, Sarah admittedly is not the numbers person, right? I'm the numbers guy. You'll see in the sample budget I throw up here, I geek out on small print and lots of zeros, right? And other numbers. And that's just not the way God's wired Sarah. And so I put the budget together and then she reviews it, right? Maybe you both like to do it. Maybe you just go line by line together. It doesn't really matter. You just need to do it together. Priority number 2 is give first, right? If you don't make giving a priority or your top priority, you will completely run out of money before you ever get around to giving, right? We talked a little bit about the motivation for this last week, but just commit. I'm giving first, and then we'll figure everything else out. And if it means I got to go back to work and make some more money to be able to cover some other expenses, well, then that's what I got to do. But we're going to commit to giving first, okay? This is a way of trusting God with the resources that He's entrusted to you. Next, pay yourself second. Okay, set aside money for savings, right? We're going to talk more about this next week. But for the same reason above, if you don't make savings a priority in your financial life, you're going to run out of money long before you get around to savings. So this is a way to encourage you to find ways of controlling your spending or being creative about how to increase your income. Fourthly, minimize your fixed expenses. We're going to talk a little bit more about these in just a minute. But these are things like mortgage, debt payments, insurance, subscription services. This is the big one that's going on, right? I hate it. Everything is a subscription service these days, right? These will eat up and kill your monthly budget and leave little room and little flexibility for accomplishing other goals. Number 5, budget conservatively. Set realistic expectations. Early on, I would always set these expectations that were out of this world. Like, there's no way this is going to happen. I'd like it to happen, but then when the rubber hits the road, you're like, no, it's not happening. Like, setting the miscellaneous spending category. You guys were talking about your grocery categories, your miscellaneous spending category. Mine is just miscellaneous spending. And I originally set it like, oh, it's going to be $200 in a month. No, it's not $200 in a month. So be realistic with it, right? Underestimate your income, overestimate your expenses. That way you're not surprised. Or if you are, it's at least a good surprise. And finally, track your progress. Find some way of tracking progress month to month and year to year, right? And this will allow you to make real-time spending decisions like, oops, my miscellaneous spending category was $700 last month. We should figure out why and try to not do that again. But it'll also give you encouragement and see the progress you're making and allow you to celebrate the victories And victory creates more victory, and it's contagious, right? So track your progress. So let's just kind of walk through and how we make a budget, right? And I'm going to flip back and forth from this to the budget that I put up here. I passed out a sample budget to you guys, and we're just going to walk through that. The first step is determine your income, right? This is the first thing you need to do in creating your budget. Everything else flows from it. If you don't know how much money you make or take home, from your job, then planning your expenses is just shooting in the dark. Like you don't know what to spend because you don't know how much you have. So you need an accurate report of the amount of money that you get from all sources, right? An important consideration is whether you're going to budget on the gross income or the net income, right? Income after withholdings. So the reality is that depending on the source of income, or what source your income is, you're likely going to have a combination budget. You're going to get your W-2 from your job, and it's already going to have taxes withheld, and it's going to have your health insurance withheld, and your retirement contributions withheld, and other things, and so it's going to be a net income to you. And so the number that you see at the bottom of your pay stub is going to be sans those things, which then I guess you could just budget off of that net and not have to worry about having categories for how much I'm going to put in retirement, how much I'm going to put in taxes. Now, if you like to geek out on all this stuff, no one's stopping you. But if you do that and then you have some other source of income, let's say you have dividend income from an investment, well, that's not going to have taxes withheld. So you may have to then create categories to accommodate for the fact that you have a couple different ways of taxing that, or of presenting that information, right? So like I said, if you have other sources of income, you need to adjust for tax or medical expenses. And then if you're not straight up W-2, right? If you're a 1099 guy or gal, you may not have those taxes withheld. You may not have your medical expenses withheld. You may not have, FICA or self-employment tax withheld. And so depending on where that's coming from, you may have to adjust. In general, you want to budget off of post-tax or take-home pay, and pay stubs are a great source of this information, right? So the question is, do I budget based on gross or net income? And I think we kind of beat this one a little bit. Take-home pay equals gross minus tax minus healthcare minus retirement withholdings and any other withholdings. And so I recommend what I do, since I'm a W-2 employee, and I have a little bit of side income from various things, but most of my income is W-2 income, is I just recommend budgeting based on your net take-home pay. Okay? Now I know my top number, I know my gross number, and you'll see it on the budget form. This is not my budget, this is just something I made up. But you'll see, I have my gross income on my budget, but what I budget off of from a month-to-month standpoint is that net, right? And this is oftentimes a little easier since we don't really have to include all the other categories and just kind of back calculate all that stuff, right? And it accurately reflects the number of dollars that I see coming in my account every other Tuesday, and then how much I then see leave my account every other Wednesday. And it makes comparing it with budgeting software really easy, because my software that I use just downloads all the stuff that comes into my bank. My bank sees my net pay, and my bank sees all the expenses I have, and I don't have to reverse engineer some of the taxes, right? What if your income's variable, right? This is a common question. You may need to broaden out the frequency that you evaluate your income to either quarterly or semi-annually or annual income. If you know I'm going to make a ton of income, but it's going to be in quarters 2 and 3, but not so much in quarter 1 and 4. That makes it really hard to then budget month to month. So you may have to back up and say, okay, averaged over the year, I project I'm going to make this, and then adjust accordingly, right? And then it's going to be some discipline to save in the lean months and not spend it all in the good months, right? Alternatively, if you have just a super random, 1 month's up, 1 month's down, you can budget off the low income month, and then everything else is gravy, and make a plan for it, right? Remember to budget conservatively, right? If your income is not guaranteed. So what if you get a bonus or unplanned money? I know this is the way my job works. I get a base salary, and then depending on how productive I am, how many patients I see, they incentivize based on that. And so every quarter, if I've made certain metrics, I'll get an additional paycheck, right? And that's not necessarily planned money. It's not too inconsistent from year to year. I kind of know roughly what it's going to be, but it's not guaranteed. And if I have a year like this year where I had decreased patients due to COVID, and then I got COVID. I mean, that can be a profound amount of difference that you may see, right? So this depends on, what to do depends on a lot of factors, right? Is it regular, is it guaranteed? You may choose to include it in your income, or you may budget without it, make specific plans for your money. The key is you gotta make a plan for it, okay? For what I do, again, I get a quarterly productivity bonus, like I said. I don't include this in my monthly budget. So my monthly budget looks very similar to what you wrote here, what I see here, or what I gave you here. It's gonna have my gross, it's gonna have my net. That net is my take-home pay, and I make other plans for that bonus, right? And then I keep a tally of all the expenses throughout the year, of large expenses. You know, if I'm planning on doing a big project or a roof or something like that, I'm gonna plan out, okay, maybe I'll do it in July, because I know I got a bonus coming in February and in May or June, I gotta look it up. And then kind of make a plan for the year to year of how I'm gonna spend that extra money and not throw it into my normal budget. The key though, like I said, is you have to give every dollar a job. Does that make sense? If you thought, we're running short on time, so I'm not gonna switch over right now, but if you look at page 2, I think, there's an income worksheet, just a ton of different sources of income that you can just fill in, you know, what's applicable to you, and then kind of use that as the tally on the top. Actually, I'll switch over here. So up here, you can see, here's the gross, here's the net. I plan for 2 people working, right? So the husband's W-2, wife's W-2. So here's their net monthly net. And then husband has a consulting job that gets you a couple $100 every other month, right? So I just threw in $500 every other month. And what I like about this spreadsheet is that I basically mark out every single month. So I can account for differences month to month. Now, usually I just average things out, and then this number reflects the kind of the total over the year. But you can sum it all up, right? And at the end of the day, this top number, the 6,500, is going to be your monthly take-home pay, essentially. And that's the top line that you're working off of for this made-up family. Again, withholdings here, this doesn't necessarily factor into my expenses, but I just put this in here just for visualization of kind of, you know, knowing how much you're going to spend in other ways. So step number 2, kind of going back to the presentation here, get an accurate assessment of your spending, right? This is the next critical thing, and it can be painful, but vitally important. So in order to accurately assess, or in order to get an accurate assessment of what you spend, you need to track your spending in some capacity, right? As you start putting your budget together, this will allow you to be realistic with your budget and make educated decisions about how much to spend on various things. And over time, this process becomes easier and easier and easier. And what I can say is, as I've been using budgeting software for a number of years, it's really easy now, especially if you stick with the same software year to year. Because I can just go back and look last year at the different categories and filter and run searches and say, well, I spent this much on groceries, you know, this month, and it averaged over whatever. And it just makes it easy to carry forward to now what do I need to spend for this next year, okay? If you don't have that though, if you're just getting started, not a problem. Hope isn't lost. It's actually really easy in this era of everything electronic. Look at your bank statements, your credit card statements. Worst case scenario, save your receipts and just write everything down. You know, pencil and paper, I spent this much. I spend little to no actual physical hard cash anymore. So everything is logged somewhere electronically. And so you could easily just kind of throw that together. Number 3, organize your expenses, okay? Once we've identified your expenses, it's helpful to start organizing them so you can kind of mentally put this puzzle together and decide where you can start cutting and trimming and doing things like that. So put them in one of 4 buckets, right? A combination of either fixed or variable expenses, non-discretionary or discretionary expenses, okay? And this helps you then decide, well, I have to pay these and I have to pay these, right? Oh, I'm sorry, the discretionary. I have to pay these and these. Okay, I don't have to pay the variable non-discretionary. I can cut those. I can, you know, make those come and go. No, I got it backwards. Non-discretionary. I have to pay these, right? I don't have to pay these. So fixed expenses are things they're costs that you can forecast each month because they don't change, right? They're oftentimes required living expenses for whatever your lifestyle happens to be. I mean, not everything is like. you probably don't have to spend money on anything if you want to live just on the side of the road. But if you want to have a certain lifestyle, whatever that lifestyle is, you have to spend money on something, right? There's not much we can do about these, but they do eat up a large chunk of our budgets, right? So be careful what you make fixed expenses. So examples of fixed expenses would be giving, mortgage payments, taxes, property tax, insurance products, health, home, car, life, disability. We'll talk about this next week. And then the big one, right, that's eating everything up now is subscription services. And I'm going to lump cable into that, right? You can decide for yourself if that's worth it. But magazine subscriptions, I don't know, Hunting Digest subscriptions for the sportsmen of us in the room, right? Costco is a subscription service now. I'm not saying these are wrong. I'm just saying they're subscription services and they're fixed.
And Sam's.
You stepped on an idol there, buddy.
They're fixed expenses, right? Contrasted with variable expenses that the cost will change from month to month, right? And these are oftentimes determined by your utilization of a product or service. So when you flip your lights on, right, they start charging you. You flip your lights off, they stop charging you. Your electric bill is a variable expense. Costco is fixed, right? $60 a year, or $120 if you get the premium subscription. Frugal decision making can make a big difference in kind of how much you spend on variable expenses. So food, electricity, natural gas, home maintenance, car repairs, gas for the cars, these are all variable. So that's one category, fixed and variable. Discretionary expenses are non-essential spending, those things that are necessary for you to live at the lifestyle that you have established for yourself, right? And depending on how the product or service is charged, it may be variable or it may be fixed, right? If they're fixed discretionary expenses, these are just huge anchors to your budget, right? And some of them are necessary, but they can be. I told you I was going to stir things up today. I didn't even get to the debt lesson. So examples of discretionary stuff: eating out, personal care, clothes, coffee shops. Some subscription services are discretionary. Non-discretionary things that you don't have the choice of paying for it. You just got to pay for it, like taxes. So if you take your expenses, you can throw them into this chart and kind of decide what's fixed non-discretionary, right? I got to pay these. There's no choice. So this is probably going to go in first, right? And then what's going to be, your non-discretionary variable, right? Those probably got to go in second. Your fixed discretionary probably got to go in third. And then finally, your variable discretionary gets whatever's left over. Does that make sense? Okay. The next thing is determine your proportions, right? Kind of develop this framework for how much I want to spend in certain categories. Big picture, right? It doesn't have to be, I want to spend 2.5% of my gross income on clothing. No, we're talking about big picture here. And so sometimes it's hard to know how much is reasonable to spend in various different things, right? And a quick Google search can tell you what the average person in Cleveland spends on groceries or on, homeowners insurance or on gas for your car. And that can be helpful for developing this framework. And it can be helpful to have a rough proportion to organize kind of these categories. And so a couple general rules of thumb that I like to use is at least 10% of my gross income is going to be giving, right? That's the way we set it up originally, is my gross, and this is why I put the gross number at the top, so it's in my face, right? 10% of that number goes to giving. And I'm just going to get rid of this slideshow for a minute because nothing on the slideshow is going to be terribly helpful right now. If you look on here, you can see I put in a percentage, right? This is percentage of gross income, right? So I did the math in the spreadsheet to say basically whatever this number is divided by that number is displayed right there, okay? And so the reason why I like this spreadsheet is I can log it out for the year, have it calculated up for the whole year, and decide how close I am to the metrics that I kind of want to set out for myself. So savings or giving, I like to keep at 10%. Savings, I try to shoot for 20% of gross income. And this is savings in all categories. So retirement, whether it be my work retirement, my individual retirement accounts, if I just put money in an individual investing account, I'm trying to shoot to get my savings to 20% of my gross income. And if you do that, you're actually going to be pretty well off come time for retirement, if things are invested in appropriate ways. That's not clearly delineated on here. I just have to do some tallies. And I think in page 4, I may have included it in your packet. There's a savings calculator where you can just type in how much you're saving each year in different categories, and it will calculate your total savings percentage. Thirdly, housing expenses, I try to keep less than 20% of my gross income. Okay, that's going to include mortgage, it's going to include home improvement stuff and maintenance and things like that. What it should cost me to live in my house should be less than 20%-ish. There's wiggle room here, but less than 20%-ish of my gross income. If it's beyond that, I'm probably living in a place that's beyond what I can afford. Okay, and again, there's no condemnation if you're at 21%. There's no extra pat on the back if you're 19%, but it's just a benchmark that I've heard, and it seems reasonable in what I've been trying to do for myself. Okay. Beyond that, there's the 50-30-20 plan. Trivia fact, does anyone know who came up with the 50-30-20 plan? Elizabeth Warren. It's the only time I've actually, sorry for the political, only time I've ever agreed with anything that she said financially. But 50% for necessities, 30% for discretionary, 20% for savings. Seems reasonable. Again, none of this is written in the Bible. Find out what works for you, but these are some pretty decent, kind of benchmarks. Step 5, create your categories. We're gonna have to start buzzing through here because I'm going way over in this talk. Create your categories, kind of start piecing things in, right? Your insurance, your home, your auto, your kids, your medical. Be as detailed or as general as you want to be. If you want to have eyes on this and track this and know I spent this % on my pet this year, then create a category for it. And what's helpful is to kind of create the categories to correlate with your budgeting software so then they kind of easily transfer over, okay? And like I said, the order the tackling the expenses, and then finally adjust and trim, right? And this is the kind of where the rubber meets the road of, I guarantee you're going to want to spend more than you have, and at some point you're going to have to look at it and just say, I can't do that. So what I've done in here is I've created the different categories. Giving, there's extra taxes that I need to pay beyond, my W-2. I like to categorize or lump things together, so I have insurance, right, and just put my different insurance products together, so I can see how much I'm paying on insurance. Now, I've debated over the years, do I put car insurance up there? Do I put homeowners insurance, or just keep under housing and automotive? I've kept them under there. Again, there's no rule that you can or can't. But I try to have broad categories and then subcategories underneath, so I can parse out every month what I want to spend, the total for that month, and the total for the year in those categories, and see what percentages it reflects off my gross income. And at the end of the day, you get to the bottom, right? And you can see how much your total expenses are and what your margin is, okay? And decide if you got a positive margin, woohoo! If you don't, then you got to go back up and adjust and trim and recalculate, okay? And finally, let's get back on here. Track your progress, okay? This is the critical step, is tracking what you do so that you can then rejoice in the successes, but also have that daily feedback of, I went out to Starbucks too much this week and I can't go back next week. Okay, I've used up my eating out budget already, and it's only the first week of the month. There's a lot of ways to do this. Here's a number of different online ones. Mint is a free online software. I know you guys have mentioned you've used it. I've used Mint in the past. It can be a little bit cumbersome because they kind of pigeonhole you into their categories. But if that works for you, it works great. It's free. YouNeedABudget.com is another source. Every Dollar is the Dave Ramsey one. Actually, I heard this one's pretty good. I don't have any personal experience with it. I heard an interview with the founder. But he basically says, you guys need a budget, and we're going to help you create it. Quicken is kind of the original one. And then I use QuickBooks. This is more for businesses. We use it here at church. I use it for my rental business. So it just makes sense that I use it. And I treat my finances more like a business, but it's what I use. You can always use Excel. You can use just the good old-fashioned envelopes, but do something to track your progress, right? Next, step 8, make a plan for your margin, all right? If you got margin, make a plan for it. You don't want to leave these dollars unattended because they'll find ways of running away, Okay, and so what I like to do, in the packet I have, I think it's page 3 is that large expense worksheet. It might be page 3 or 4, but basically I have a tally of, if I receive a gift of money, if I have a bonus, any income that's not otherwise budgeted, other than just like, here's $5, have a nice day. If it's a large amount that's not budgeted, it goes in there as a positive, and a large expense over the course of the year goes as a negative. So I don't budget month to month for my Roth IRA contributions. I put it on here. And then towards this time of year, I try to find and gather money to do that. And that becomes part of my large expense, spending for the margin. You may choose to do it differently, but this is just the way I do it, and it tends to work well for us. So that being said, we went a little over on the budget side, so we're going to not do the discussion questions. So let's take a 30-second break, 1-minute break, to get up, stretch our legs, get all those blood clots knocked out from the sitting down, and then we're going to go into debt. Well, not go into debt, but we're going to talk about debt. Sorry, I cut the discussion short. There's some discussion questions at the end of lesson 3 on your notes. I highly encourage you to kind of go through that at home and throughout the week. And then the homework, again, is to basically create your budget and write that down. And then there's something about writing kind of how you do budgeting in your personal financial plan. So remember, the goal of this course is to be able to walk out of it with a written personalized financial plan. I put there's a sample one up on the Google Drive that you can. It's adapted from mine, but I tried to make it a general language that kind of be easily applicable. But just take that and kind of write in each week the different categories of what we're doing, kind of how you want to then your goals and how you want to then accomplish your financial these aspects of your financial life that we talk about. And at the end, if you track along with that, you'll have a 10 or 12 page document that's going to be a blueprint for kind of moving forward. So anyway, we're going to I'll probably end up going over a little bit, try not to go over too much. But this is a hugely important topic, and I don't necessarily want to cheat it too badly. But it is considered the great American novel. You guys know which one that is? The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, right? I actually was a little underwhelmed when I read it, 'cause I'm like, this is the great American novel, expecting something like, really, really thick, but it wasn't. But in this story, he tells a story of a wealthy young man in love with a former fling, now herself married to a wealthy millionaire, right? Gatsby is desperate to reunite with his past love, and for a while does, until that nefarious relationship is revealed to her actual husband, Tom, who himself is having a mistress on the side. It's a nice sordid American tale. In the end, Gatsby, Tom's mistress, and her husband, the mistress's husband, all end up dead, okay? And throughout the story, money flows like water from lavish parties thrown by Gatsby to the disinterested boredom that drove Tom to his adultery. And the story closes with a somber tone, with all left broken, owing to misplaced love and misplaced priorities. It's a compelling but sad story of just what money will do to you. And like the story, at the heart of almost all the problems with money, there's a problem with misplaced love, right? When we get our priorities mixed up, then downstream problems happen. And in this lesson, we're going to explore the idea of the love of money and the implication that it has regarding debt, okay? So 1 Timothy, I didn't put it in there. 1 Timothy 6:6-10 says, "Now there is great gain in godliness with contentment. For we brought nothing into this world," right? We came in our birthday suit. It's the Matt Tabbitt edition. "And we cannot take anything out of it. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs." So the big idea with this lesson is that debt is a problem with contentment long before it is a problem of income, right? So how is the love of money the root of all evil, right? And we're going to look at this in a number of different ways, right? The love of money is a contentment problem, right? Discontent is the root of a lot of problems that we have with money, right? In Philippians 4:11, Paul writes, "I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content." And while we all desire this level of contentment, and with God's grace we can have it, right? If we honestly reflect on our own hearts, we find that fundamentally we are discontented people, right? And since discontent is a soil in which the love of money grows, we must be vigilant. If we back up and think about discontented people that we see then the discontented person. That totally just didn't flow. I'm going to start over. If we back up, right, and think about discontented people, we can see that discontented people lack humility, right? And that's what I'm trying to get at. A problem with content is a problem with our pride, right? Problem with discontent is a lack of humility. The discontented person really thinks of himself more highly than he ought to think, right? He thinks he deserves more than he's been given, and this leads to some sense of entitlement, right? And the result is a lack of humility and an obsession with self-glory, right? The life that's turned inward when we've been created to live upward and outward, right? And we can see this in our finances. When we are discontented and entitled, our financial decisions start to become how we can fulfill our needs, our wants, our desires, and to pursue our pleasure and our comfort and our ease, and not how we can love God and love other people with our money and our things, right? And so living for self is at the core of all kinds of evil. Secondly, the love of money is also an identity problem, right? The love of money is connected with forgetting who we are and what life is all about. We talked about this last week. Life is about God, right? God is our creator, and us is his creation, and his grand narrative for the world, right? And when we selfishly prioritize the present, we forget to live for eternity. Thirdly, the love of money is a fallen world problem, right? We live in a world constantly competing for our affections. This principle will be on grand display tonight, right, as we watch the Browns game. And we talked about commercials. Like each commercial is designed to capture our affection and get you to spend money on that product, right? And the reason this is a significant issue is because we live in a world that doesn't function as God intended for it to function, right? It is the temptation to replace the worship and service of a creator with the worship and service of the creation. And we're asking the creation to give us something that only God, the creator, can give us, right? We're asking the world to give us meaning and purpose and to provide salvation and restoration from our brokenness and to provide the object and affection of our worship, or in worship. Thirdly, the love of money is a worship problem, right? We talked a little bit about this already, but the love of money is ultimately this problem of worship. It is evil because the love of money leads us to the worship of something other than God, right? When we love money, or when the love of money is rooted in our hearts, we find ourselves worshiping at the altar of that money, right? It's not a little thing. It's the portal of all kinds of evil because it connects us to a foundational, life-shaping issues of the heart, such as contentment, identity, how we understand and relate to the world and live in it, how we understand eternity and worship. And if we get the last issues wrong, there's no way that we'll live as God intended us for us to live. And finally, the love of money, and this is kind of one that's a little bit more scary. The love of money makes you dangerous to you, right? If you think about what life would be, let me back up. Think about what life would be like if you were the center of the universe, okay? I think we can look back at history as our guide to see what that would be like, okay? And I'm not going to necessarily do an exposition of historical events. You know, and this may not be practically the case, but when we love money, we functionally put ourselves at the center of our existence, right? And when you are at the center of your existence, who is there to say no to you, okay? What are your authorities? What are your boundaries? What are your rules? And what holds you back from being the worst version of yourselves, okay? When you are at the center, you will be the ultimate consumer. You will have a ravenous and insatiable hunger, and you will always be on the lookout for the next pleasure. And when you love money, you love you because it makes you feel better about you, right? When you are living for you are living as if God doesn't exist and as if you have the right to write your own rules, right? It's just kind of that self-autonomous, I am, the master of everything, right? You see, the love of money sits at the epicenter of a lifestyle of self-glory and constant craving, right? And in a way that is foundational to the life, in a way that is foundational and life-shaping, the love of money replaces the love for God in your heart, right? And you cannot simply be the center of your world and be your own highest authority and not be a moral danger to yourself, right? Because when you are at the center, you will not say no, right? There's no checks and balances to you, right? So when this happens, what happens when your heart is captured by the love of money and you are your own highest authority? Well, really 4 things. No, I didn't put them down in your notes. You have an I deserve that's unquestioned, right? God doesn't rule your heart anymore. You do. And so you think you deserve things, right? And then you spend money on yourself because you deserve it. Secondly, you have an I want that's unrestrained, right? If everything's about you, what's there to prevent you from getting what you want or seeking what you want? And then thirdly, there's a me first undebated, right? The mentality that reduces other humans to obstacles in your way and something to be bowled over, right? And finally, an I will that's unchallenged, right? My money becomes the currency that finances my self-directed little kingdom of one, right? The good news is that you don't have to carry this heavy burden of guilt and shame around with you, right? On the cross, Jesus liberated you not only from the mess of your sin, but also the delusions of your self-righteousness. So after all this discussion of how horrible we are and how much of a wreck we make things, when we put money in the place of God, we need a huge dose of grace, okay? For as much as we reject God and idolize and worship ourselves, he offers us grace. Remember Romans 5:20, right? Now the law came to increase the trespass, but where sin increased, grace abounded more, right? Grace humbles us as it opens our eyes to the fact that it's not all about us. And I love 2 Corinthians 8:9. We mentioned it last week. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich. Right? This is the power of transforming grace. It makes us thankful. It makes us content. It makes us patient. And it makes us compassionate with those who are less well off than ourselves. Right? So with that in mind, wow, I blew through those notes really quickly. We're going to transition our minds. I wanted to get through that, though, because I think this is at the core of understanding debt and how to deal with debt. Like, we have a money problem and a love of money problem, whether we know it or not, right? And I think that fuels a lot of then the decision-making that gets us into the problem that we have with debt. And we cannot fix our debt problem until we first constrain our money love problem, right? So let's talk about debt, right? Financial success is about more than building wealth and the number of dollars you have, right? Financial success is a mindset, and is a mindset that God is in charge and that we are his stewards, right? And I had a great conversation with Steve Blake this week. He called me up after he was listening to last week, and he was sharing some of the stuff that he learned about the parable of the talents. We referenced that last week, and I'm sure he's going to expound on this more in his course coming up about what it means to be that steward. And talk to Steve. He'll go on for half an hour and tell you about this. But what it means to be the steward of that money that God has entrusted to us, right? So our behaviors, talking about this mindset, right? Financial success is a mindset. It is a mindset that God is in charge and we are stewards. It is the mindset that God has given us all that we need for life and godliness, okay? And in this, we can be content, right? We may not be millionaires, which I would challenge. I have a book that I'm going to bring next week that says with some good planning, by the time you retire, you probably can be, right? But we may never be millionaires. But who cares? God has given us everything that we need to be content. Okay? So therefore, behaviors like debt are the antithesis of this mindset, right? That is, often when we get into debt, we are reflecting a heart that is not content in the current state in which God has placed us. And we are saying that we would rather have this thing now than to be content with the blessings that God has given us. Okay? It is a mindset of, I need things to be happy. And I need them now. Like that JG Wentworth commercial. I want my money and I want it now. That was successful marketing. It is a financial myopia that does not plan or prepare for the future. Okay? Now, I've been saying this week we were going to stir the pot. And we just did it, right? Let's poke that bear. Okay? And I know this may be hard to hear for a lot of people. Okay, who are struggling under the burden of debt and just trying to get the leg up and trying to do the right thing, and they find themselves falling back into this hole of debt. Okay? So I don't want you to think when I say this that if you are in debt, you are somehow a less than perfect saint or somehow a sinner, right? There are exceptions to what we're talking about, but I think as a general rule, we need to burn into our hearts, into our minds, that debt is first and foremost an issue of our mindset and our contentment with what the Lord has given us. Okay, and then we can talk about the nuances, and we will, if I can have the Lord stop the sun, as he did in the days of the Old Testament. I have till 8 o'clock. So if you think about selling debt is a huge business, right? It's actually a field of investing. Like if you want to get into buying debt as an investment, there's a field of investment for you for that, right? But the reason for this is debt is profitable to the seller, right? It's a product that's sold, not necessarily bought. So we have to look. So we don't have to look too far to find someone selling debt to us. Like debt is offered. Let's play the debt bingo tonight, right? Put on the board all the different ways you can find debt and see if you can get like a bingo, right? Credit card applications, payday loans, car loans, mortgage loans, student loans, HELOCs. They're on the 480 billboards. I had someone call me trying to sell me a HELOC on my house. I'm like, look, dude, if I don't have enough money to buy something with my income, what in the world makes you think I should take out a loan against my house to buy it, right? He didn't really try to sell that too much harder after that. But there's plenty of different ways of going into debt, right? And it is oftentimes rarely ultimately beneficial to the consumer. Now, we can talk about leveraging if you're in the context of a business and things like that. Okay, I'm going to set that aside. That's not personal finances, right? For you, debt is rarely to your benefit, ultimately, right? In fact, it's a really inefficient way to purchase things, sometimes necessary. Like, I don't have enough money to buy my house right now, so I have to go into debt to buy it, and I accept that there's a fee for that convenience. But it's really inefficient way of purchasing a lot of other things, right? It's basically a convenience tax or a dissatisfaction tax, right? So think about it, a credit card balance of $1,000 with a debt, like with an interest rate of 20% paid over 12 months, right? If you just paid the thing off in 12 months, you're gonna pay an extra $200. So it's $1,200 for that $1,000 product, right? A little car loan, we gotta do some math, but a $40,000 balance on a car loan at 5% paid over 60 months, you're gonna pay $5,290 in interest. So your car now costs you $4,500, right? So how do we deal with the debt that's in our hearts? I think we all probably acknowledge that debt's not a great thing to keep around and we don't really want to keep it around, but how do we deal with it, okay? So this is where I work. Metro Health Medical Center Emergency Department. This is a picture I took and then Photoshop made it look so much better. This is where I work. This is what I do. Okay, now this is not my resuscitation bay.
I was gonna say.
I just Googled this one. But I've had resuscitations where you walk out and like, wow, looks like that. When you get someone who's crashing and burning, right? Someone who's shot and who's just bleeding out, and you're desperately trying to resuscitate them, there are certain priorities that we need to take, okay? Being neat and tidy is probably not one of them, right? But there's certain priorities that we need to have. And I think if we think about the medical resuscitation, it probably gives us a little help kind of understanding how to deal with the financial resuscitation. So in emergency medicine, patients crashing and burning, I don't have time to sit here and like pontificate on it. Like this is why I'm an emergency doctor, not an internist, right? Internists, like they sit in the room and like, let me think about this one. It could be this rare disease. I'm like, I don't know. I don't even know what the rare disease is. Is your heart beating? Are you breathing? If not, I'm going to fix those, right? So identify the problem, okay? Number two, specifically like if for a trauma patient, stop the bleeding, right? So once we've identified, there's red stuff going right there, put a finger in it, and get that stuff to stop, okay? Thirdly, once we've kind of got control, and I joke about this, right? But this is literally what we do, right? Where are you bleeding? Stop it. Okay, now that we've stopped it, let's open it back up a little bit and see if we can figure out what's wrong, right? Or run you through the CT scanner, figure out what blood vessel we just blew open, right? So assess the injury, and then finally repair the damage. Once we've got control, now we can slow down, right? Now we can methodically go through step by step and do what we need to do to get the patient better, right? And so I think if we take this paradigm into fixing debt, it's actually quite helpful, right? So number one, identify the problem, right? The problem is finding our satisfaction in our stuff and not God, okay? We were made to serve something. We've talked about this, right? We were made to be content, or the Lord says we need to be content with what we have, right? And find our satisfaction in Christ. And I think this is the verse that I was thinking of, and I didn't write it down. Stupid me. Proverbs 22:17. No, I'm sorry, 7. Yeah. Oh, no, it's a different one. I'm studying a couple weeks ahead, so there's a verse that I was thinking of. Anyway, the rich rules over the poor, the borrower will be slave to the lender, right? When you are in debt, you're a slave to the person that you owe money to, right? You owe a certain amount of money to them, so they have that first lien position on your finances, right? It's human nature to want something and want it now, and to the extent that we continually subject ourselves to that, I want it and I want it now, that's just a sign of our immaturity, right? And sometimes we just need to grow up. So the ability to delay gratification is really a sign of both of physical or financial and spiritual maturity, right? And I don't want to over spiritualize if you made an impulsive decision, you're not spiritual, right? That's not where I'm going with this, right? But the whole idea of the now and the not yet is like biblical delayed gratification, right? We're not in heaven yet. That's a delayed gratification. And we suffer under the weight of sin in this world until that comes, trusting that the Lord will provide that. You can hit me if I'm being heretical, Dave. Anyway, so debt is a means of obtaining what I want before I can actually get it, okay? So that's identifying the problem. It's a satisfaction problem. Number 2, stop the bleeding, right? Stop going into debt, right? Just cut off the cards, right? The cardinal rule of holes is stop digging, because all you do is just make it deeper and you pile dirt on top of yourself. Cut up the credit cards. Use cash, right? And if you really have a hard time with using cash, like for me, cash just flows, like there's a hole in the bottom of my wallet that cash just falls out of, right? If you have a hard time with using cash, at least use a debit card. You know, something that it doesn't make you go into debt and you can see those expenses coming off. But statistically speaking, you're more likely to spend more money if it's easier to spend it. So it's easier to swipe than to pull it out and find your $20 that you don't have, right? So if you're really having a hard time, go to cash, right? But at least if you're continually digging your hole with the credit cards, get rid of them, cut them up, okay? Number 2, get on a budget, right? A budget is very important here because it gives you a clear-eyed understanding of what you have and what you can afford, and then that tracking of where did I actually spend it, and so you can compare your expenses to your pre-planned, this is where I'm going to spend my money, okay? These are going to be hard decisions, right? Your lifestyle is going to have to change, right? If you're going to fix the problem, if you're going to get out of the hole, you have to fix something, right? And your lifestyle is going to change. And you may even need to get rid of things that are costing you money, right? You may have to sell stuff. If you find something that's kind of constantly draining your money but not providing you financial benefit, get rid of it. You know, and again, I don't want to be like virtue signaling of what you need to get rid of, but perhaps the cable needs to go. Right? That's $100 in your monthly budget that you could probably put somewhere else if you're really struggling to make ends meet. Okay? Get some accountability, number 3, right? You don't get points for doing life on your own, right? Talk to me, Goose. You are going to be making some hard decisions, and you need someone to help you stick with it, okay? You need an accountability partner. I've never been through it, but AA has this exactly right. You need to have people in your life that hold you accountable, right? And this is why every time I sit in front of a patient who's struggling with the addictive effects of drugs or alcohol, particularly heroin, because that's what we see a lot of, and I say, look, dude, and I've had patients like this. I'm like, look, you are in for a miserable, miserable period of time in your life. But I know for a fact that you have the best thing going for you right now with your dad sitting right there, right? The fact that your dad knows what's going on with you and loves you and is here for you in your lowest moment is 100% what you need, because you need that accountability, right? So get an accountability partner, right? If you're married, you need someone in addition to your spouse, okay? And I'm not saying your spouse is inadequate here, but your spouse is probably complicit in helping you get to the problem that you're in, okay? And maybe not complicit, but just kind of wrapped up enough in it that there's gonna be some blind spots and some hard conversations that will, you know, that probably won't go well in that context, right? So get an accountability partner, you know, to join your family in your finances, right? To stop the bleeding. Number 3, assess the injury, right? You need, and this is where it gets painful. You need to make an accurate and honest list, and honest is the key, of all the debts that you have and identify them in terms of the debt, right? The creditor, the principal, the terms, the interest rate, the monthly payments. Get all that information on a spreadsheet, okay? If you look on the financial, or on the budget, right? I was gonna separate this out and I guess I didn't get around to it. If you look on the budget spreadsheet that I put on there, there's I think a debt I didn't print it out. But if you download it from the Google Drive, there's a debt spreadsheet that has the categories of all these things: your creditor, your principal, your term, your interest rate, and your monthly payment. And if you get them all out there, you can clearly see, this is how much I owe every single month, here's my total balance, but you can also organize them and sort them, right? And that's gonna be key, right? This is gonna be painful, right? But you'll likely have a history of financial decisions paraded out in front of you But the only way to affect real change is to be honest with yourself, right? About your need and about your situation, okay? Now, if this sounds familiar, it probably is because it is, right? This is the exact same thing that we do with Christ, with God, right? The only way we can tap into the grace of God for our ultimate spiritual lives is to humbly come broken before him and say, here's my catalog of sin. I can't do this, right? And the good news is that same grace that saved you is the same grace that will also help lift you out of the hole of debt that you may find yourself in, okay? Now, it's not going to be without painful laboring, right? But there is grace for all of our sin, right? Or all the mistakes that we make. And I don't want to say, to water down sin and say it's mistakes, but I don't know. We'll leave that there. Like I said, Excel can be super, super helpful here, right? So sources of debt include your mortgage, your car payments, your credit cards, payday loans, right? Student loans. My uncle loaned me this many dollars. You know, just find all your debt and make that catalog, okay? And then finally, you're getting to the hard work of it, repair the damage, right? And there's multiple ways that we can repair the damage, right? And I'm going to talk about these two and suggest why why they're there, but not great options. And then obviously we're going to really emphasize why the debt snowball is probably the best option for you, right? So debt consolidation and debt refinancing, right? This is a way of basically saying, here's all my debt. I'm going to put it under one roof with a new interest rate and start over and pay that, right? And this can be a helpful strategy. There's certainly room to have this, okay? And it can help you decrease the amount of interest that you pay, especially with credit card loans, which are so high interest rate. There are companies that will buy your debt and offer you a different interest rate, right? They'll say, you owe $30,000 combined to all these different sources with a variety of interest rates. We will buy your debt at 6% interest for the next 20 years. And your new payment is now this, right? And you could do the math and figure out what that it is. You know, and that may be a way of decreasing the number, like the bottom line number. Like if you can't make your budget work, that may be a way of doing it, okay? But there's some potential downsides that you need to know about before you do this so that you go in very clear-eyed, right? The devil's always in the details. So the problem with debt consolidation, refinancing, put this on your bingo board, by the way, for tonight's game. A debt refinancing thing. It's on the radio every single morning when I listen. The problem with this is that consolidating and refinancing, while it offers you a lower rate, you're often extending the term of your loan, okay? So if you refi your house, like I could go refi my house right now. Now, I got in when rates were really good, right? And so rates are still good. They're probably pretty comparable to what I got. But I had a guy call me up. He's like, I can refi your loan for, you know, X percent. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, buddy, but unless you can beat this is what I'm actually paying, then we don't have a place to talk. He's like, yeah, I can't beat that. So he hung up. But they're going to extend the term of your loan, which makes the payment lower because now you took your 30-year loan that you paid 10 years onto, and you start the clock all over again. So now you have another 30 years to go, right? So you basically took those last 20 years of payments and stretched them out an extra 10 years. So you're going to pay less, but you're going to pay more in the long run, okay? And the companies that buy your debt are working on trying to get you a lower monthly payment, but they own the terms and they can extend that out, right? And they're going to do what's best for them. They're not going to go into this because they love you. They go into this because they're trying to make money, and that's the way they make their money. And if you look at it, like look at car loans. When they try to sell you a car loan, right? They don't sell you the principal amount. They sell you the monthly amount, right? And then they make the terms. You can manipulate the stuff like the Wizard of Oz. You know, like, don't mind the man behind the curtain. You can manipulate the rate and the length of the loan to make that monthly payment come out to look, oh, I can afford this. It's $250 a month. You know, who couldn't afford that? So again, it's an option, but it's probably not your best option. Okay. Additionally, there's also probably some refi fees. So not only will you have to pay, whatever the extended loan term is, you're gonna have to pay probably a couple grand for your house, a couple grand in fees just to make it happen. Now, here's where it actually could work in your favor. Let's say you got your mortgage at, 6%, and now rates are, I haven't priced them out lately, but they're in the, what, 3s now for a home mortgage? They were in the 4s and they've come back down. 2s, yeah. So I got mine at 2.8%, right, 5 years ago. So they went up and they're coming back down. So 2 point something percent, right, 2.8%, and you got it at 6%, let's say. You could refi that and then say, I'm just going to commit to like continue paying what I'm paying, you know, and maybe that refi fee is going to make some sense for you. So again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just you just got to know the details and do the math, right? In my notes, I got some interesting math. I'm not going to take the time to go through it right now. I can show you if you want. So number 2, debt settlement, right? This is probably a less good idea, okay? This is an option where you pay a company to negotiate and work with your creditors to reduce the amount of debt that you owe. Say, I'm overwhelmed, I can't do this thing, I'm not going to pay it. You know, I'd like to, but it's just not going to happen. And so let's make an agreement that you'll get something, and that's better than nothing, right? And there are companies that will help you do this, right? And it's based on the principle of getting, like I said, something is better than nothing. But depending on the terms, you may not end up saving a ton of money, right? Remember, these companies are trying to make money too, and they're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart to make your life better, right? And the other big thing is this is going to negatively affect your credit score, right? Now, there will come a point in time, once you're out of debt, once you've had your home, once you've bought your cars, that a credit score probably becomes less and less meaningful for you. But over the course of the kind of building part of your financial life, a credit score is incredibly important because that's going to affect some terms that you get and other loans that you may need to take, okay? So with that said, I would propose to you that the debt snowball is probably the best way of reliably getting out of debt. And what that entails is basically cataloging your loans, okay, making that list that I put in the Excel sheet, and then organizing it based on size of principal. Okay, the principal is how much you owe. Organize it smallest first. And so Excel has a really cool function that if you highlight that column, do Control or Command All to select the entire sheet, and then go to Custom Sort. There's a box that you can say, my list has headers, and it pulls all those headers in. So you pick the one you want, say lowest to highest, hit OK, and then boom, it sorts everything underneath that header in your loan. So you can say, this is my lowest principal, and work your way up, okay? And then, in the order of your debts, start paying them, right? Take everything extra that you have. Try to budget some extra. Just dump everything you can at the smallest loan, right? And pay, as soon as that one's paid, work on to your next one, right? And don't change the amount of money in your budget that you pay towards debt, right? Keep that number the same. So as you continue to progress down this list, the amount that you pay every single month gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And then before you know it, right, all of a sudden you're paying on that last loan, and then it's done, right? If you stop the bleeding and start methodically working through this, right? Now contrast this with what Dave Ramsey calls the debt avalanche, okay? Some people they say, well, a snowball sounds a lot less, you know, exciting than an avalanche. Avalanche is a big miraculous thing. And the debt avalanche is this idea of organizing by highest interest rate, okay? And there's some credibility to saying I want to knock out my 30% interest over my 10% interest, okay? But the argument he makes, and I think it's reasonable, is to say if the 30% interest is one of your higher principal loans, you're going to have a harder time building up the motivation to keep going, right? Because you're not going to see a lot of progress, right? We are beings that thrive on seeing the progress and the successes, and that motivates future progress and future success. And so it may be more advantageous to you to stay with the course of taking the smallest one and say, I know that by 6 months from now, I can knock this one out and just cross it off my list and then go on to the next one. Whereas if you do your bigger ones, it's going to take you 1.5 years, 2 years, and you're just going to get mired down in some of that progress, right? So again, there's no sin issue. There's no biblical mandate that it has to be done one way or the other, but I think you're going to be most successful with the snowball method, right? And then the final thing, and I didn't add this to my injury thing because we don't really focus on this in the ED. This is going to be more system health, is prevent further injury, right? If you got shot because you were walking out on the streets of Cleveland at 2 in the morning with a bag of cocaine hanging out your back pocket, what do you think would be a good way to not get shot again? Right? I read a book. It's called The Little Red Book of Wisdom or something like that. Jim DeMoss, is that who wrote it? Have you ever read it? I'll have to find it. He said, nothing good happens after 10 p.m. And I am a firm believer in that principle. I'm getting sidetracked. If you think about it, nothing good happens after 10 p.m. Just go to bed, right? You won't get shot. So prevent further injury, right? Getting out of debt and making progress towards goals will be a huge motivator to stay out of debt, okay? But you may, depending on how ingrained that mentality of I want, therefore I get is, right? It may be that you have to take radical steps to protect yourself from that, right? The person who's addicted to alcohol can't drink a drop of alcohol once they've gotten sober, right? It doesn't work. You can't just say, I'll try have a little bit, right? Because you always fail. Same thing with debt. You may need to take radical steps to avoid further debt. Do you even need a credit card, right? Are there ways that you can kind of get away with using a debit card, right? If you do need a credit card, have strict rules for yourself of when and how to use it. And keep that accountability in your life, right? And seek the Lord in His persevering grace, in the grace of in your financial life, okay? Now, we are over our time, and I have one more topic to go. You want me to keep going, or you want me to stop? Keep going? Okay, I'll go fast. Anybody have kids that they're waiting on? Okay. No hurt feelings if you guys have to excuse yourself, okay? Is debt ever appropriate, right? This is a huge question. So should I, I've been pounding on this, don't go into debt, don't go into debt. If you do, you're reflecting some sin nature in your heart. And I know that's gonna ruffle feathers. And so is debt ever appropriate, right? We need to keep the big principle that debt is a huge impediment to having the financial freedom to pursue our financial goals, right? Whatever goals you wrote down last week and have in your financial plan that we're going to talk about over the course of the next weeks here, debt will get in the way of that, right? So we need to have that as our first and foremost framework, okay? And there are those who teach that there's no appropriate role for debt. Dave Ramsey is one of them, right? Largely because he over-leveraged himself and had a huge debt problem he had to dig out of, right? And that affected him, right? And that's certainly not an unreasonable opinion for him to have. I don't completely share, I share most of what he teaches, but I don't share the opinion that debt should never be engaged in, right? But on the other end of the spectrum, the internet is flooded with people who want to give you free and easy debt, right? And that's not good either, right? So I land somewhere in the middle with a strong lean towards what Ramsey teaches, right? So I feel that debt is a tool, but it's a dangerous tool. It needs to be used very carefully. It's like my chop saw, there's blade guards so that I don't go ring and then all of a sudden be like a one-armed ER doc, okay? But there are appropriate places to have debt in our financial life, right? That being said, it should never be a default option, okay? It should be entertained as a last resort. And if debt is a problem for you, you are far better off cutting it out altogether than engaging in it, right? So remember Proverbs 22:7, the rich rules over the poor, the borrower is the slave to the lender, okay? So good debt versus bad debt. We talked about that, there we go. Good debt is a loan that has the potential to increase your net worth or an appreciating asset or something that causes you to generate income, right? So your house is an appreciating asset. When you sell it in 20 years or 30 years or however long it's going to be, you are likely going to get more out of it than you bought it for. Now, you're going to spend a lot of money on making sure it stays up to tip-top shape, but hopefully it's an appreciating asset for you. And so it's not unreasonable to use debt to purchase your house. In education, right? This is another thing that is an incredibly beneficial asset. One of the biggest things that you can do to increase your net worth and your earnings potential is to get an education, right? Now, there's great jobs to be had with a trade skills, right? We're not knocking those at all. Like, we need solid people in the trades. But as a general principle, if you go and get a bachelor's, a master's, or a doctorate degree, unless it's a doctorate in like some grievance studies at an Ivy League school, you're probably going to have a better earnings potential. And so it's a worthwhile investment than to say, I'm going to take some debt to go in to get this product. Does that make sense? Yeah. Right? So I consider those to be reasonable places where debt would be appropriate, okay? If you're a small business person, you may need to get some debt to be able to get the assets that you need to create the capital to build your business, right? This is big into real estate. You leverage your house to get another house, and then that tenant pays things off. And as long as your debt to income ratio is appropriate, then it's okay. It can work financially. We'll keep it that. So what I like to try to keep in mind is my debt to income ratio, right? And keep that below 3 to 1, right? So I want my debt to be no greater than 3 times my gross income, right? So I make X, therefore I should not have more than Y, or X times 3 in debt, right? Once you start exceeding that 3 to 1 ratio, it becomes really hard to shovel your way out of it, right? Anything under 3 to 1, 2 to 1 is even better. It's a loan that's pretty easy to pay, okay? So bad debt is borrowing to purchase a depreciating asset or something that costs you money, right? I'm gonna ruffle some more feathers. A car loan would fit in this, right? Now we oftentimes do it because we need the car to be able to live our daily lives, but you are buying a car and that car is a depreciating asset, right? That thing's gonna cost you more money and be worth less in 2 years than it was today, right? So you're far better off to buy something that you can afford with cash, drive it for a few years and save to buy that next car than you are to get whatever fits you now, even if it's not breaking the bank, with a loan, right? Now, I have to say I've purchased the last 2 vehicles that I currently have with a car loan, but that's because they made me. They wouldn't take my cash. So I just got a term that I paid off in 3 months. Other bad sources of debt would be like clothes, food, consumables, your discretionary items. Remember that box down here. Payday loans, don't do that. If you can't afford it on Tuesday, why are you buying it today, right? If you don't have enough money to get you into Tuesday, you really got to take a hard look as to why, okay? So what do you do if I'm stuck? And we are almost done, right? There may be times when you're caught in a life situation outside of your control and beyond your capability to reasonably predict, and you may not have enough saved to spend, for the spending that you need to do. Like, you're working on saving up for your car and your current car dies unexpectedly, and all of a sudden now you're stuck, right? I don't want to get that car loan. I'm buying a cheap enough car, but I can't afford all of it. I got 10 of the 20 grand, I got to take a loan. It's not an issue of sin. It's not a matter, that does not, your heart is in the right place, right? And so there's grace there, right? The example I put down is you fall on the ladder and break your hip, requiring a surgery and 2 nights in the ICU. You have a $5,000 deductible, and your insurance covers 90% of your bill, leaving you with $10,000 in medical expenses, and you don't have 10 grand. What do you do, right? There's some days when you may just have to take on that loan, right? With all the desire to stay out of debt and honor God in this situation, you're stuck, right? So there can be situations where debt is appropriate as a last resort. And this is what I'm trying to get at is debt is bad, right? It reflects a heart and a mind that is oftentimes poorly prepared for the things that life will throw at us and wants what we don't need and reflects the heart that doesn't trust in the Lord. But things sometimes happened, and that doesn't necessarily reflect that heart. Does that make sense? It's not eloquently stated, but that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. So the questions to ask yourself, is this debt necessary or is there an alternative, right? Is this debt that I'm about to undertake an evidence that I'm not putting my faith and trust and satisfaction in God's provision, right? Do I really need the solution that I'm about to undertake, or is there an affordable alternative option, right? So what do you do when you take on new debt? Trust the Lord for his provision in repayment, okay? Tighten your monthly budget and increase your margin. Aggressively pay your loan, and then continue to save that margin once you've paid it towards a larger emergency fund when you're done, okay? And with that, I've reached the end of my notes, and I know this has been a highly controversial evening, and we've gone 15 minutes over, so appreciate your time and attention. Let me close in prayer for the grace that we need to pursue our financial lives. Go over the discussion questions, go over the homework, kind of fill in your financial plan, kind of do what you need to do in these categories next week, or this week, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week, where we are going to talk about taxes and insurance. Yes, we're finally going to get into some building projects here. So, Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about finances and talk about what our heart treasures and what our heart loves. Lord, I pray that our heart would ultimately treasure and love you more than the things that you've created. To the extent that this conversation has ruffled feathers, I pray that your grace would fill our hearts so that we can seek to glorify and honor you with our lives and in our finances, and that you may be magnified and you might be glorified in all that we do this week. Bring us back safely together next week so we can learn more stuff. I pray this in your name. Amen. Thank you, guys. Have a great week. Go Browns.